There's power in the ability to give our lives away, but we must be free to do it. Welcome to Ostracon, a podcast that translates fragments into the whole from which they came. Today we're thinking about 3 words: freedom, power, and control. What do they mean? How do we use them? And do they mean the same thing? Oftentimes, the way they're used, they do indicate the same thing. Power, the ability to do what you want, to go where you want, when you want, to see the world, to have experiences without restriction, to not be limited by need, hardship, illness, maybe even not needing to work. Control, very much the same. Having power over your circumstances. They are subject to you. You can control them. You're not contingent or dependent upon other things. And many times when we use the word freedom, we use it in the same context. I'm free to do what I want when I want. But can these terms really be the same? There's something immediately suspicious in the way that freedom and control contradict. Oftentimes, when we are controlled, it is to the detriment of our freedom. But what about the person controlling us? Is it their freedom? Does their freedom come at a cost to our own? Or is freedom like a candle where you share the fire and it's divided but undimmed? And somewhere in the back of our minds is always the ghost of one of the oldest stories in human history, the exile from the garden, where Adam and Eve are free to make a choice. They are free to do what they want, but in doing it, they don't find freedom. Rather, they find disassociation, disorder, suffering that results, the destruction of relationships, and exile. They end up, it seems, less free because they are now under the power of other things in the world that they are contingent upon. Maybe they had the power of choice, but the making of the choice was not freedom. Maybe even the choice itself was under the power and influence of another. And we're back now to the question we asked a moment ago, but it's an internal instead of an external dynamic. What if my own exercise of power reduces my freedom by subjecting me to things I was not before subject to? Then how can they be the same? And that's taking it in a negative light. Try it in the positive opposite. What if I elect to make a sacrifice, to give something up for the benefit of someone other than me? I'm free to do it, but maybe it results in a diminishment of my control or power. Let's see what the dictionary says, which in my case is a 2,500-page Webster's. Power, ability to do, capacity to act, capability of performing or producing. There's a quote from Abraham Lincoln: "The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract." From the Gettysburg Address. It also includes a specific ability or faculty, ability to do, act, or affect, the ability to control others, authority, sway, influence, physical force, capacity. Now how about control? To regulate, to verify, to exercise authority over, direct or command, to curb, restrain, or hold back. And there's an interesting quote from Dryden: "I feel my virtue struggling in my soul, but stronger passion does its power control." Now freedom. the state or quality of being free, especially exemption or liberation from the control of some other person or some arbitrary power. Liberty, independence, exemption from arbitrary restrictions, exemption or immunity from obligation or discomfort, as in freedom from want, being able to act, move, use without hindrance or restraint, being able to choose or determine freely, freedom of will. My Oxford New American Thesaurus has some interesting synonyms: liberty, release, deliverance, independence, exemption, dispensation, and right, privilege. And we begin to get the sense, as we become more precise, that while these words are often used interchangeably, in fact, there may be a positive-negative relationship between them. That power or control is something outward. It is exerted upon others or upon the world. And freedom is not being exerted upon, and maybe not being indebted to or beholden to something. Maybe even in a world where we find ourselves as contingent creatures, dependent upon other things, we yet may not be beholden to them. They may not rule us, even though they be a real need. For example, in the need to work to survive, we may find a full expression of ourself and a realization of our identity in our work. Drudgery can be controlling, but the joy of good work can be liberating. And here's perhaps the most obvious example of all. We are all subject to death, but do we fear it? Do we live in fear? Fear would be controlling. It would have power over us. But freedom from fear would be liberating. Consider also the following. Freedom allows us to do things that are the opposite of power or control. Consider the freedom to make a promise that binds you, but it is in your power to do it. Think of the freedom to choose to do good, that doing good is possible, even if it comes at cost to you. Think of the freedom of making a vow. Think of the bride and groom standing at opposite ends of the aisle, looking at one another, having the full power to live forever for themselves alone. But instead, they take their whole lives, all the rest of their days, in their hands, in their power, and they exercise the power to give that life away, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad times. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. There's power in the ability to give our lives away, but we must be free to do it, free to subject ourselves to the vow, free to do a good thing that then requires something of us, because if all we wanted was power, then we would never give anything away. We have the power to give our lives away. But if we want always to have as much power over as many things as possible, then we would never give them away. And you might even say we would not be free to give them away, because we would be subject to the desire for power. Power would exercise control over us in limiting our ability to make a choice. And thus, there is a diminishment of freedom. So freedom may be not just to be free from the control of other external things, but it can be freedom from the control of our own flaws of our own desires for wrong things or for selfish things. It's hard to say that someone is free when their desire for something wrong has drugged them down such that they are living as a shadow of themselves. And with the idea of freedom being not subject to these other worldly contingent things, think even of the freedom of ownership. While on the one hand, power or control would say that we can surround ourselves with all the comforts and pleasures of the world. But remember the old teaching that what you own owns you. Think of the freedom of being unconstrained by the transient things that we own. And going back to the desire for control, isn't control itself always an illusion? And if we are free from the desire to control, then are we free of an illusion? Think of power and control getting us all we ever wanted, such that we lived entirely in comfort and pleasure. What would it be to never strive, to never exercise courage, to never realize ourselves in our work, never produce anything, never do something hard, never feel hunger, to be an adult who lives like a child, in constant distraction with toys, to be subject to distraction because we deathly fear what we would think or feel if we were not distracted. We may have the power and the control to distract ourselves, but can we say that such a person is free? Think of the animals in the zoo that get all the food and medicine and care that they could ever want, but nobody wants to live in a cage. I mentioned hunger a moment ago. We are contingent natural creatures, so we can never be free, so to speak, of hunger this side of paradise. If we are controlled by our hunger, we may feed it and feed it and feed it, and it never goes away. But think of the freedom of not defining ourselves by the hunger that we must experience. Think of the things that can be found in hunger. I'd encourage you to listen to our recent episode on Samuel Barber's Sure on This Shining Night, which explores the idea of how it must be night to see the stars. So reflecting on these things, can it be that freedom is not the same as power or control? Because always doing what you want conflicts with the ability to do what we should. Do we have the freedom to do what we should? Or are we a slave to our wants? It seems that freedom is much more an alignment with virtue and with our human identity. I say virtue because the virtues are the things that prevent us from becoming subject to the world that wants us subject to it. The virtues, fortitude, justice, temperance, prudence, faith, hope, charity. These are the things that allow us not to cower to the transient world and to its desires. I say freedom also is aligning ourselves with our human identity because we are in the world but not of the world. We are from and for God and in His image, and we are also in a body here and now, in the fall. We cannot change that the power is God's and that we are contingent beings. But we are also made for paradise. By accepting that identity, we can live up to that high destiny. Or, if we are stunted by the desire for power or control, we can spend a lifetime trying and failing to escape the great gift of that identity.